It was the winter of 1943. London was dark, shrouded in blackout curtains, and humming with whispers of new intelligence plans. Amid the ongoing tide of war, a small, nondescript office inside MI6 headquarters on Broadway Street became the epicenter of a daring operation. Few inside Whitehall even knew its name: Operation Pilgrim. Its purpose was simple in writing yet perilous in execution: to smuggle key resistance fighters and intelligence leaders out of occupied France, before the Gestapo silenced them forever. The idea had been born months earlier, as reports flowed into Britain from the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. Resistance networks in France were providing invaluable intelligence: railway maps, German troop counts, weapon test sites. But Gestapo counterintelligence was closing in fast. Many resistance figures, men and women who had risked everything, were being captured or killed. Their capture meant not just the loss of allies, but the exposure of Britain's secret operations. To MI6, extraction became a matter of survival. Behind closed doors, a young intelligence officer named Commander Robert "Bobby" Latham was tasked with creating the framework. Latham, a naval officer turned spymaster, coordinated between MI6, the Admiralty, and SOE operatives on the ground. His orders were clear but chilling in their simplicity: bring them home, whatever it takes. The selected codename, Operation Pilgrim, symbolized the journey from darkness to safety. Yet for those involved, it was also a pilgrimage into the unknown. The mission's early planning drew heavily from the experience of clandestine naval operations in the English Channel. Since 1941, small vessels, often disguised as fishing trawlers, had been used to ferry agents across. These moonlight operations were fraught with danger. Tides, weather, and German patrols turned each voyage into a gamble with death. Still, the British believed the system could be adapted to move resistance leaders out of France in a new, organized fashion. The first targets were members of the French resistance networks in Lyon, Marseille, and Toulouse, cities pulsing with underground activity. Among them were railway engineers, code messengers, and couriers who had mapped entire German supply chains. One such figure, known only by her alias Clements, had coordinated sabotage of a major German fuel depot. Her intelligence was invaluable, but she was now being hunted by the Sicherheitsdienst, the Nazi security service. Time was running out. MI6 prepared for the extraction with meticulous care. Radio operators trained to use B2 suitcase transmitters, compact, powerful sets capable of reaching London in bursts of coded Morse. Airdrops delivered money, forged documents, and medical supplies. Yet even in planning, the shadow of betrayal loomed. Earlier in 1942, the Prosper network in Paris had been compromised due to a single arrest that spiraled into dozens. MI6 could not afford another disaster. A declassified memorandum from the War Office later noted, "The rescue of resistance personnel is of equal importance to sabotage. Their intelligence constitutes a weapon." This was not sentiment, it was cold strategy. Every name smuggled out of France was a living archive of enemy secrets. In January 1943, as the first teams were assembled, German occupation forces intensified their sweeps. In Lyon, the Gestapo launched Action Donnerschlag, Operation Thunderclap, rounding up hundreds suspected of aiding the British. Resistance radio traffic all but ceased. MI6 learned through intercepted Enigma decrypts that several British agents had been captured alive. The race was now against both the enemy and the clock. To conceal the mission, Latham worked under diplomatic cover, reporting to the British Embassy in Madrid. From there, he liaised with operatives in France via coded telegrams passed through neutral Portugal. It was a web of deceit, and a single misstep could bring it crashing down. As one of his agents later recalled, "We lived in shadows. Even our allies did not know our true names." As February approached, final preparations began for the first extraction attempt. A converted fishing vessel, the St. Bride's Bay, was chosen for its small profile and twin diesel engines capable of outrunning patrol boats. Its captain, Lieutenant Eric Havers, had run blockade operations off Dunkirk 2 years earlier. The route would take them from Dartmouth across the Channel, landing near Quiberon Bay on the Breton coast. The extraction window, 20 minutes, no more. The men were briefed one final time under dim red light at a naval outpost. Havers reportedly told his crew, "If anything goes wrong, remember, this never happened." The words encapsulated the essence of MI6's wartime work: unseen, unacknowledged, and unforgiving. At dawn on February 11, 1943, Operation Pilgrim officially began. The St. Bride's Bay slipped quietly out of the harbor into a rising mist. Above, a lone RAF reconnaissance plane circled to provide weather data, unaware of the true nature of its support mission. Back in London, Commander Latham waited by his radio, the static punctuated by coded bursts from the French coast. The plan was in motion. But the sea, like war itself, has its own plans. The weather reports soon turned grim. Heavy fog drifted across the channel, masking both friend and foe. Somewhere beyond the horizon, German E-boats prowled on patrol, hunting for any sign of clandestine movement. The men aboard the St. Bride's Bay could only trust in their training, and hope that the next voice they heard was not that of the enemy. As night fell, radio silence blanketed both sides of the channel. MI6's first message from the operation came hours late, and it carried only a single word: contact. What followed would determine whether Operation Pilgrim would be remembered as a triumph, or as the beginning of a mystery that would haunt MI6 for decades to come. By the spring of 1943, Operation Pilgrim had evolved into one of the most closely guarded undertakings within MI6. Following the tense first transmission from Quiberon Bay, simply contact, British intelligence scrambled to piece together what had transpired. Though some resistance operatives had been successfully lifted from the French coast, others had gone missing in the chaos. The mission's architect, Commander Robert Latham, knew that to continue, the operation would need not only precision but invisibility. Thus began the creation of the Courier Line, an underground lifeline stretching from Lyon to the English Channel, operated under the deceptive cover of humanitarian work. The Special Operations Executive, SOE, and MI6 had long shared uneasy cooperation. The SOE specialized in sabotage and direct action, while MI6 focused on intelligence and espionage. But in this operation, their paths intertwined completely. Through carefully crafted fronts, like the British Red Cross, the Quaker Relief Mission, and neutral Swiss charities, agents moved disguised as aid workers, transporting resistance fighters and intelligence reports hidden inside crates marked for medical supplies. One of the couriers, an SOE operative named Captain Henry Fletcher, described it years later: "We wore compassion like a mask. Underneath, we were running an exodus through hell." The Courier Line's main arteries began deep inside occupied France. In Lyon, resistance leader Jean Moulin's network coordinated the safe passage of fugitives to Toulouse and onward toward the Pyrenees. But as German pressure mounted, air routes became too dangerous, forcing MI6 to rely on maritime extraction. The fishing ports of Brittany, Saint-Nazaire, Lorient, and Quiberon Bay became focal points of smuggling activity. To the untrained eye, they were ordinary villages scarred by war. To MI6, they were gateways home. Communication between London and France was perilous. Couriers used pianists, radio operators who transmitted encrypted messages from safe houses. They operated B-2 suitcase radios powered by hand-cranked generators, sending short coded bursts that lasted no more than 20 seconds before German direction finders could triangulate the signal. Even then, each transmission was a risk. In March 1943, the Gestapo intercepted a signal near Vennes, raiding a farmhouse and capturing 3 operators. Their fate was sealed by a single mistake: transmitting too long. Still, the operation pressed forward. Fletcher and his French counterpart, an SOE-trained agent codenamed Lucette, organized a steady stream of resistance couriers. Their typical journey began in Lyon, traveling by train under forged papers, posing as textile merchants or nurses. From there, local guides, often fishermen or farmers, led them to coastal villages where British extraction boats waited under the cover of night. Every departure was synchronized with RAF weather reports and moon phases. They called it riding the silver tide. The vessels themselves were masterpieces of disguise. Small trawlers and motor launches, refitted by the Royal Navy's secret branch at Dartmouth, carried false identities, paint schemes, and documentation. Hidden compartments beneath the decks could conceal up to 10 passengers. Each was armed with concealed Sten guns and silent pistols, but their greatest weapon was stealth. The German Kriegsmarine's presence in the Bay of Biscay made every crossing a deadly gamble. On a calm night, you could hear the low hum of enemy E-boats, fast, lethal, and equipped with searchlights that could turn the sea into a killing ground. In late April, the Courier Line scored its first major success. 6 resistance leaders, including railway engineer André Boivin and radio operator Yvette Castain, were successfully evacuated near Belle-Île-en-Mer. The intelligence they carried later contributed to the Allied bombing campaign against German supply lines in Normandy. But their extraction came at a cost. One of the cover vessels, the SS Calderon, was intercepted days later off Brest. The crew scuttled the ship to avoid capture, and only 2 of the 6 MI6 sailors survived. The mission's balance between triumph and tragedy grew ever thinner. Back in London, Commander Latham faced increasing scrutiny from his superiors. Some in the War Cabinet questioned the value of risking naval lives for mere civilians. But Latham, haunted by the faces of those rescued, refused to back down. "These are not civilians," he wrote in a memorandum. "They are the veins through which the lifeblood of France still flows. Without them, we fight blind." His conviction earned quiet support from Churchill's intelligence coordinator, Major General Sir Stuart Menzies, known to all in the service simply as C. The Courier Line expanded further south, incorporating Spanish smugglers along the Basque coast. Neutral Portugal became a key transit point. Lisbon, crawling with spies from every nation, served as a black market hub for false papers, gold, and safe passage. British agents worked through the embassy there, funneling rescued resistance members through Gibraltar en route to London. Each movement was logged under vague entries, special cargo, priority consignment, to avoid exposure. But with each success came whispers of betrayal. In May 1943, the Germans seemed to anticipate several routes, launching surprise inspections and arrests along the southern corridors. Radio messages between Lyon and London began to include cryptic warnings: "Courier Line compromised." Latham ordered a complete suspension of transmissions for 2 weeks. Files later revealed that a single compromised operative, codenamed Falcon, had provided information under torture, leading to the capture of several key resistance contacts. Even so, the mission resumed, its operators hardened by loss but driven by necessity. They changed code names, altered radio frequencies, and restructured escape lines. For every network destroyed, 2 more emerged in its place. Yet, behind the growing list of successes, an unease lingered. MI6 analysts began to notice patterns: German patrols appearing minutes after encrypted messages were sent, courier paths blocked without explanation. Someone, somewhere, seemed to be listening. As June approached, Commander Latham wrote in his private notes, "The sea hides many things: our allies, our enemies, and perhaps our own mistakes." His words would prove prophetic. For in the next phase of Operation Pilgrim, the operation's veil of secrecy would begin to tear apart, and the first true mystery, the disappearance of an entire extraction crew, would grip MI6 in fear and silence. By mid-1943, the Courier Line was stretched to its breaking point. Every signal from France came at a price: one more operator exposed, one more resistance cell dismantled. Despite early successes, the pattern of near misses and sudden betrayals began to haunt MI6 command. The tension within London's intelligence offices was palpable. Files were marked "eyes only," and even among operatives, names vanished from the record overnight. It was during this time that the first major disaster of Operation Pilgrim unfolded, a failed extraction that would send shockwaves through both MI6 and the French underground. The plan, approved in June 1943, was simple in theory. A group of 8 resistance leaders, including Colonel Marcel Lefebvre, a key liaison to the Free French forces, was to be extracted from the coast near Quiberon Bay. Lefebvre carried vital intelligence: details of German fortification patterns along the Atlantic Wall, intercepted from collaborators in Vichy France. If delivered to London, the information could dramatically aid Allied invasion planning. To the Germans, Lefebvre's capture would mean the dismantling of the Western French resistance. The stakes could not have been higher. At 2,200 hours on June 19th, a converted fishing vessel named MV Grey Swan departed from Dartmouth under heavy fog. On board were Lieutenant Commander Eric Havers and a skeleton crew of 6 Royal Navy volunteers. Their orders were explicit: no radio transmissions, no engagement unless fired upon. The route, plotted carefully against German patrol schedules, would take them through a narrow corridor near the Isle de Huat. By dawn, they were to rendezvous with resistance boats carrying the extraction targets. Meanwhile, on the French coast, the resistance team had gathered at a small inlet near Saint-Pierre-Quiberon. The beach, bordered by dunes and pine forest, was perfect for covert landings. "We could hear the hum of engines before we saw the boat," recalled one survivor decades later. "It was ghostly, like something rising out of the fog." The Grey Swan had arrived right on schedule. But what happened next remains one of the enduring mysteries of Operation Pilgrim. According to MI6's partial radio logs, the crew sent a single coded pulse to London at 0315, payload received. Then, nothing. Minutes later, German naval intercept stations in Lorient picked up unidentified transmissions from the same sector, signals that suggested a confrontation at sea. By sunrise, the Grey Swan had vanished without a trace. The initial assumption was mechanical failure or capture. German E-boat patrols operated heavily in the area, and it wasn't uncommon for Allied craft to be sunk without survivors. Yet, in this case, no wreckage was ever recovered, no debris, no lifeboats, not even oil slicks. British naval intelligence sent reconnaissance planes over Quiberon Bay for 3 days straight. The sea, however, remained silent. Officially, the Grey Swan was listed as missing, presumed lost. Unofficially, the whispers began, of betrayal, of double agents, of something darker moving within MI6's own ranks. Commander Latham, the operations overseer, was devastated. In his private field diary, declassified in 1999, he wrote, "If the Germans found them, we'd have proof by now. But we have none. The absence of evidence is worse than death, it's uncertainty." His words reflected a growing sense of paranoia within British intelligence. Who had leaked the route? The Germans had begun sweeping coastal sectors with uncanny precision, as if reading British orders before they were carried out. An internal MI6 review found troubling inconsistencies. The last known weather transmission, supposedly confirming safe passage, had been sent using an outdated cipher key. Furthermore, the Grey Swan's replacement fuel manifest listed an unfamiliar signature, A. Fenton, a name that did not match any registered naval officer. Investigators would later determine that the falsified paperwork had originated from within the War Office's own logistics branch. Whether by accident or design, someone had tampered with the mission's records. The disappearance of the Grey Swan sent a ripple effect through the resistance. For weeks, French operatives avoided contact with British agents, fearing infiltration. The Germans, emboldened by their apparent success, launched Operation Lila, an intelligence sweep across Brittany. Dozens of couriers were arrested. The flow of information to London slowed to a trickle. It was as if the lifeline had been severed. In one of the few surviving correspondences between SOE and MI6 at this time, an SOE liaison officer warned, "Pilgrim's routes are burned. Any attempt to resume contact without reorganization will be suicide." Yet London could not abandon the mission. The resistance leaders still trapped in France possessed crucial details about German radar installations and U-boat pens, data essential for the upcoming Allied landings in 1944. There was no choice but to rebuild from the ashes. To maintain morale, MI6 circulated internal memos reframing the loss as an operational delay. But for those inside the service, the truth was impossible to ignore. One of Latham's aides recalled seeing him late one night, pacing the hallway of the Broadway office, muttering, "Someone knew. Someone always knows." It became a refrain, a quiet acknowledgement that the war in the shadows was as dangerous as any battle fought on land. In the months that followed, the courier line underwent complete restructuring. Agents changed aliases, new landing sites were charted along the Bay of Biscay, and communications protocols were rewritten from scratch. Still, The name Gray Swan hung like a curse. Every mission briefing ended with the same unspoken question: would this one disappear too? By the end of 1943, Operation Pilgrim continued, but under a new, darker atmosphere. Every success was tempered with suspicion, every coded message scrutinized for hidden traps. The disappearance had transformed MI6's war into something colder, more paranoid. The goal was no longer just to rescue resistance fighters, it was to uncover who, or what, inside their own network had doomed the Gray Swan to silence. As winter set in, Commander Latham wrote one final note in his private ledger before closing the case for review. "We saved many, but lost something greater, our certainty. The sea gives no answers." Those words marked a turning point. The operation would proceed, but from this moment forward, every movement, every order, and every transmission would carry the weight of unseen eyes. And in the darkness of the Bay of Biscay, those eyes were already watching. By early 1944, the war had entered a decisive phase. Allied strategists in London and Washington were preparing for the invasion of Western Europe, what would soon be known as D-Day. Yet for MI6 and its clandestine arm, Operation Pilgrim, the task remained the same: extract the resistance leaders still trapped in occupied France before the Germans could crush the networks that would support the invasion. Time was running out, and the lessons of the Gray Swan's disappearance weighed heavily on every operative involved. Commander Robert Latham had become a ghost of his former self. Those close to him later recalled that he rarely spoke above a whisper, his voice worn by too many briefings that ended with too few answers. The official investigation into the Gray Swan had closed with the phrase, "lost at sea, cause undetermined." Unofficially, Latham and a handful of his trusted aides began what they called Project Mariner, a shadow inquiry into whether the disappearance was due to betrayal, interception, or internal sabotage. While London debated, the war demanded progress. The next operation could not wait. This time, MI6 turned to the Royal Navy's 15th Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron, based at Felixstowe. These fast, lightly armed craft, known as MTBs, were designed for speed and stealth. Their crews, hardened veterans of night raids across the Channel, had earned a reputation for operating in near-total darkness, guided only by compass and nerve. The squadron's commander, Lieutenant Commander Peter McGregor, was chosen to oversee the next extraction run under the new designation Pilgrim 4. The objective: retrieve a single high-value resistance leader from the French coast, a man known to the British only by his codename, Valois. Valois was, in truth, Captain Henri Durand, the elusive leader of the Marianne Network, one of France's most effective resistance organizations. Durand had coordinated sabotage against German fuel depots and transmitted critical intelligence on Wehrmacht troop movements to the Allies. His capture by the Gestapo would have been catastrophic. British intelligence had already learned that Durand was being hunted by the Sicherheitsdienst, and his capture was expected within weeks. MI6 authorized his extraction by sea from the Breton coast to Gibraltar, where he would be flown to London. The operation's complexity rivaled that of any naval mission of the war. On the night of March 3, 1944, 3 MTBs, numbers 237, 242, and 249, departed from Plymouth under blackout. Only one carried the true mission orders, MTB 242, under McGregor's command. The other two boats served as decoys, tasked with drawing German patrols away from the rendezvous zone. The boats moved in near silence, engines throttled low, running just beneath the surface radar threshold. The crews had been ordered to maintain complete radio silence until the return journey. At 0200 hours, 242 reached its destination, a secluded inlet near Audierne, along the coast of Finistère. Waiting in the darkness were 4 small fishing boats manned by French resistance guides. McGregor's signalman blinked a coded light sequence, MP, for Mission Pilgrim. In response, 3 flashes returned from the shore, the confirmation code. Durand and his escort began their approach under the pale wash of moonlight. "We could see them wading through the surf," one sailor would later recall, carrying sacks over their shoulders, papers, radios, things they'd risked their lives to protect. The transfer took less than 10 minutes. By 0220, all personnel were aboard, and 242 began its retreat toward open water. The sea was calm, the sky overcast. The operation appeared to have succeeded flawlessly. But as they entered the Bay of Biscay, a faint radar contact appeared off their starboard bow. MacGregor ordered an evasive turn southward, assuming it to be one of the decoy vessels. Then, without warning, the radar echo multiplied, 2, then 3, then 5. German E-boats. The ensuing chase lasted just over 30 minutes. The German craft, faster and heavily armed, closed the distance quickly. 242 engaged at full throttle, zigzagging through the darkness as tracer rounds ripped across the waves. According to fragmentary records recovered after the war, 242 transmitted a single coded burst to Plymouth at 0307, pursued, North Sector. That was the last anyone ever heard from the vessel. When dawn broke, Royal Air Force reconnaissance planes were dispatched to scour the bay. They found only a thin oil sheen on the surface. No wreckage, no survivors, no trace of the passengers or crew. The other 2 MTBs returned safely, unaware that their companion had vanished into the sea. At first, Naval Command assumed 242 had been sunk by enemy fire. But when decrypted German naval records were examined weeks later, no reports of a confirmed kill matched the time or location of the disappearance. This anomaly ignited another storm of suspicion within MI6. Had the boat been captured? Was it possible that someone on board had defected or redirected the craft under false orders? Latham demanded access to all intercepted German communications, searching for any mention of prisoners or wreckage. None existed. The Germans appeared as puzzled as the British. In an internal memo, Latham wrote, 242 did not simply sink, it vanished. The sea holds wrecks, but this one holds silence. Even Churchill's intelligence advisor, Major General Menzies, was forced to take notice. A quiet inquiry was launched within Section X, the branch responsible for maritime intelligence. They discovered that prior to departure, the mission's navigation orders had been duplicated in Lisbon, a known hub of Axis espionage. Whether the leak occurred there or within the Admiralty itself was never proven. Still, the implication was chilling. Someone, somewhere, was feeding information about Operation Pilgrim to the enemy. In the months following the disappearance, rumors swirled among naval officers that pieces of the MTB's hull had washed ashore near Bilbao, Spain, neutral territory. The fragments, if they existed, were never recovered. Spanish fishermen later reported seeing a British patrol craft drifting without lights days after the incident, but these accounts remain unverified. By April, Commander Latham had become consumed by the mystery. His colleagues described him as hollow-eyed, obsessed with tracing every signal, every transmission that might explain the loss. Yet the deeper he searched, the more opaque the trail became. Files disappeared, names were redacted, and certain reports were sealed indefinitely under wartime secrecy acts. Officially, the loss of MTB 242 was attributed to enemy action under unknown circumstances. Unofficially, it became the heart of the enigma surrounding Operation Pilgrim. As D-Day approached, MI6 was forced to move on, redirecting its attention to supporting the invasion. But among the intelligence circles of London, one haunting question lingered. What truly happened to the men of MTB 242, and to Captain Henri Durand, the resistance leader whose survival might have changed the course of Europe's liberation? The file was closed with a single line typed in red, "Mission incomplete, status unresolved." Yet the silence of that night, and the sea that swallowed it, continued to echo through the corridors of MI6 long after the war's end. London, summer 1944. Europe was aflame. As Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the world above ground moved inexorably toward liberation. But beneath that chaos, MI6 was fighting a quieter, more elusive war. Operation Pilgrim, once a lifeline between Britain and the French resistance, was now fractured, tainted by the ghosts of its own secrets. The disappearance of the MTB 242 had left deep scars within the intelligence community. And what began as a rescue mission had turned inward, into a desperate hunt for the truth. Commander Robert Latham's office on Broadway Street had become a maze of classified files and redacted cables. He worked alone most nights, lit only by a desk lamp and the dull green glow of a decoding machine. Pinned across his wall was a map of Europe, threaded with string and small brass tacks marking each known point of contact for Pilgrim's network. He had crossed out most of them. "Every name I strike," he reportedly told an aide, "is a man I'll never find again." By July, internal MI6 reports began surfacing that raised alarming questions. Forged dispatches had been discovered, coded telegrams claiming to originate from Lisbon and Madrid, directing SOE field agents to phantom rendezvous points. Several resistance couriers following these false orders disappeared en route. The tone and style of the messages were impeccable, their ciphers authentic. Whoever had forged them possessed insider knowledge of MI6 encryption systems. That narrowed the list of suspects to fewer than a dozen people, none of whom could be accused without proof. At the same time, an audit of the agency's financial transfers revealed something stranger still. Significant gold payments had been routed through Lisbon to an untraceable recipient labeled AF. The initials matched the falsified signature on the Grey Swan's final fuel manifest from the previous year. To Latham, this was no coincidence. He began connecting the dots, an internal pattern of betrayal reaching into both MI6's maritime division and its Iberian intelligence networks. But proving it was another matter. Wartime bureaucracy buried secrets under layers of clearance. Files went missing, requisitions were misplaced, and some of Latham's inquiries were redirected by higher authorities. In one chilling exchange preserved in declassified memos, a superior officer told him, "Leave the sea to the Navy and the secrets to those who keep them." It was a warning, one that Latham ignored. To understand what had gone wrong, Latham turned to the remaining resistance survivors who had reached London. Among them was Yvette Castaigne, the radio operator rescued months earlier near Belle-Île-en-Mer. She described how, before her extraction, she'd been told to use a new signal code, one that did not match her SOE-issued cipherbook. The code had come, she was told, directly from London Control. When her signal reached England, she received no response. It was only by chance that a separate team intercepted her message and arranged a rescue. To Latham, this was confirmation. Someone had been inserting false orders into MI6's communications chain. Meanwhile, the war outside raged on. The Allied invasion was turning the tide, but for MI6, internal chaos threatened to unravel years of careful work. The German Abwehr had been largely neutralized, yet fragments of its spy network continued to feed disinformation into Allied channels. Lisbon remained the crossroads of espionage, a city crawling with agents from both sides, where a misplaced letter or whispered word could change the course of nations. British Field Officer Peter Sinclair, stationed there at the time, wrote in his diary, "Every man in Lisbon sells something. The question is whether it's coffee, information, or a soul." Amid this climate of mistrust, a new theory began to form among Latham's team, that the betrayal within Operation Pilgrim had not originated from German intelligence at all, but from within Britain's own intelligence hierarchy. Evidence pointed to a small administrative office in Section D, responsible for coordinating communications between MI6 and the Admiralty. Several of its clerks had access to cipher keys, shipping manifests, and diplomatic pouches. One of them, a man named Arthur Fenton, had vanished from duty in early 1943, shortly after the first disappearance at Quiberon Bay. His personnel file had been marked reassigned, but no record of his reassignment existed. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. Fenton's name, his initials, even his supposed handwriting matched those on the falsified orders that doomed the Grey Swan. Yet when Latham demanded access to the classified personnel archives, he was denied. "The file is sealed under Section X," the response read. It was as close to confirmation as he would ever receive. The betrayal had been buried, not just by the enemy, but by his own service. 4 months afterward, strange inconsistencies continued to surface. Radio logs disappeared. Field reports were redacted mid-sentence. Even payment ledgers were altered. It was as if history itself was being rewritten in real time. MI6's internal counterintelligence branch, Section 5, launched a covert review under the code name Operation Holloway. The findings, released only decades later, revealed that at least 2 senior intelligence officers had knowingly suppressed information about the Pilgrim losses, fearing public scandal and loss of wartime morale. As the summer wore on, the Allies advanced deeper into France, and Operation Pilgrim was formally disbanded. Official communiques described it as a success under hazardous conditions. The truth was far murkier. Out of over 100 agents and resistance members involved, more than 40 were missing, some presumed killed, others simply erased from record. The documents that might have explained their fate remained locked away in government archives, some still classified to this day. In September 1944, Commander Latham submitted his final report. It was short, clinical, but laced with quiet bitterness. "We have delivered men from tyranny," he wrote, "but we have not delivered ourselves from deceit." Shortly thereafter, he was reassigned to the Admiralty for health reasons. He would never again lead a covert operation. Years later, when his wartime papers were unsealed, historians discovered the last entry in his private journal, a reflection scribbled in the margins of an intelligence report. "The war gave us heroes, but it also gave us ghosts. I fear I have served both." The ghosts of Operation Pilgrim would linger long after the war's end. Though the Allies won their victory on the beaches of Normandy, MI6's victory remained uncertain, its own ranks haunted by silence, mistrust, and a trail of secrets buried under the tides of the Bay of Biscay. But even as the guns of Europe began to fall silent, one question still remained unanswered: what became of those who vanished? And why had the truth been hidden for so long? The final chapter of Operation Pilgrim would not be written in the war years, but in the decades that followed, when secrecy itself became the last battlefield. The war was over, but its secrets were not. In the quiet years following 1945, Britain celebrated victory, rebuilt its cities, and buried its dead. Yet behind the locked doors of the Secret Intelligence Service, a different kind of burial took place: the deliberate sealing of files, reports, and testimonies from Operation Pilgrim. For those who had survived, the mission faded into rumor and denial. For those who vanished, there were no graves, no official acknowledgments, only names scratched in private diaries and in signed memorials. In the late 1940s, MI6 began declassifying minor wartime missions for record-keeping and commendations. Pilgrim was not among them. Commander Robert Latham, now retired to the coast of Devon, was never publicly recognized for his work. He lived quietly, his war a shadow he never escaped. According to neighbors, he spent hours walking the shore, often gazing out to sea as though expecting something, or someone, to return. His health declined steadily, and in 1953 he died of heart failure. Among his effects was a weathered folder marked only with a single word: Pilgrim. The contents, preserved by his family, would later be studied by historians. Inside were fragments of the operation's true story, naval charts annotated with red ink, photographs of resistance fighters, and handwritten notes describing the disappearances. One entry, dated July 1944, stood out: "The silence is intentional. Someone wants it forgotten." Latham had never stopped searching for the truth, even as his own agency had turned its back. For nearly 3 decades, the name Operation Pilgrim remained absent from official records. Then, in the mid-1970s, under pressure from historians and journalists, the British government began releasing portions of its wartime archives. Among the declassified materials were fragments, references to coded sea operations, encrypted telegrams from Madrid and Lisbon, and naval logs from the 15th Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron. None directly mentioned Pilgrim by name, yet the pattern was unmistakable. Historians pieced together enough to confirm that a secret extraction program had existed between 1943 and 1944, focused on evacuating resistance members from occupied France. But the most sensitive sections, those dealing with unaccounted personnel and missing assets, remained heavily redacted. It wasn't until 1998 that the first real breakthrough emerged. A series of French naval records, long thought lost, were discovered in a private collection in Brest. Among them was a report from a fisherman dated March 1944, describing a British torpedo craft adrift in the Bay of Biscay, with no lights and no crew visible. The account, while unverified, reignited speculation that the lost MTB 242 and its passengers might have reached neutral waters, or been intercepted by forces other than German. Some even suggested that the vessel had been deliberately diverted to Spain or Portugal under false orders. But by then, every surviving witness was gone. The mystery remained intact. In the years that followed, journalists and military historians revisited Operation Pilgrim with renewed vigor. The BBC aired a short documentary in 2004 titled The Vanished Convoy, exploring the possibility of internal sabotage within MI6. The program featured excerpts from declassified memos and interviews with former agents, including one who claimed that certain post-war transfers of gold through Lisbon matched the AF signature connected to Arthur Fenton, the man whose identity had never been fully verified. When pressed for comment, the Foreign Office issued a terse statement: "No records exist to substantiate these claims." The denial only deepened the intrigue. Modern scholars continue to debate whether Pilgrim's losses were the result of German counterintelligence, internal treachery, or a deliberate cover-up to protect broader Allied operations. What is certain, however, is that many of those smuggled to safety through the operation went on to play pivotal roles in post-war Europe. Some became politicians in the new French Republic. Others helped establish early intelligence frameworks during the Cold War. Their survival shaped the future, but the cost of their rescue remains hidden beneath layers of secrecy and silence. In 2012, a Freedom of Information request led to the partial release of a War Cabinet summary dated December 1944. The document included one striking line: "The Maritime Extraction Initiative, Pilgrim, achieved objectives within acceptable losses." Certain elements remain undisclosed for reasons of national security. Even nearly 70 years after its inception, Operation Pilgrim was still officially undisclosed. Today, historians can reconstruct only fragments of its scope: coded transmissions from Lion, fishing trawlers repurposed as covert transports, resistance figures spirited away through fog and darkness. What they cannot reconstruct are the missing, the crews who never returned, the couriers who vanished, the vessels that disappeared beneath the waves of the Bay of Biscay without a trace. Their fates remain locked in silence, their stories scattered across sealed archives and forgotten coastlines. In a 1999 interview, one former naval officer who had served under Commander Latham offered perhaps the most fitting epitaph: "We called it Pilgrim because it was a journey to salvation. But for some of us, salvation never came. It stayed out there, somewhere beyond the tide." The world has changed since those shadowed nights of 1943. The war's great battles are taught in classrooms, its heroes commemorated in stone. Yet the sea still keeps its secrets. Every few years, fishermen off the French coast haul up a rusted fragment of steel, a faded insignia, a corroded dog tag, and for a moment, the silence of Operation Pilgrim stirs again. The story ends not with revelation, but with remembrance. The men and women of MI6's secret operation to smuggle resistance fighters fought a war of deception, sacrifice, and loyalty tested beyond endurance. Their mission saved lives, and buried others beneath the waves. Some questions may never be answered, some files never opened. But in every recovered name, every resurfaced photograph, the echoes of that secret war still whisper. The truth may drown, but it never disappears completely.